Hey, this is Ling Wong from businesssoulwork.com, and this is the Blab series on mindset and marketing for the maverick entrepreneur. And today I have Rachel Allen with me. She's I don't know, copywriter is probably just like one part of what she does, because when how I met Rachel was I saw one of her blog posts and it just hit the nail on the head. And I'm like, Rachel, we gotta connect, and why don't we do a blab, because this is fun. And I'm sure we have a lot to talk about. So Rachel, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and then we'll get going.
Sounds good. First, thanks so much for having me, Ling. I'm really excited. So I'm Rachel Allen, and I'm the founder of Bolt from the Blue Copywriting, where I do striking copywriting for unusually interesting businesses.
Lovely. That sounds fun. Unusually interesting businesses. I like that.
I know. I like it too.
Yeah. Okay. So where it all got started is actually a blog post that you wrote. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's along the line of how to be vulnerable in your copy without being a jerk.
Yeah.
So let's talk about being a jerk in our copy. In the copy, like how do people come across as a jerk or not being what I like to say is I think at the time that I saw your post, I was also ranting on fake vulnerability that people put out, sort of like you can start seeing this formula of doing vulnerability in your copy and all that jazz, and it just got us started. So why don't we first start by saying, like, how do people come across as jerks in their copies?
Oh wow, there's like so many ways. Talk about being spoiled for choice. One of the main, the main thing is making the copy about you instead of about the reader. And that's what it all ultimately comes down to. So that's going to be anything that, it could be something as subtle as using a lot of me language, like I do this, I do that, instead of you get this, you'll get that. This gives you like an awkward feeling because it's kind of like, oh, look, it's all about me. But it can also be something like talking about a subject that your readers just aren't interested in. The best copy or even the best blog post about a subject is going to be spam in front of the wrong audience.
Right. So it's what I like to call is like these copy are navel gazing. It's about you. It is about something that you want to talk about, but it is not a good match for your audience. For sure. I guess there's also a distinction here, right? We all have our opinion, to each his own. But I think it's when you use copy as a means of communication, you use your copy as a means of telling people what you do and why you're relevant to them. In that scenario, you have to consider the audience. We can all write in our own little journal and close and be done with it. But that's, that will be for our journal. So let's talk about vulnerability. How do you define vulnerability, and sort of what is the problem these days of people do? What comes across to you as fake vulnerability?
Okay, so how do I define vulnerability? To me, vulnerability is something that it requires an emotional connection with someone. It requires an emotional pay-in on their part when you share it. So if I share something vulnerable with you, I'm requesting you to emotionally connect with me in a way that may not be all of that comfortable for either one of us, but can ultimately be very, it can be very intimate, it can be very healing. And that's what I talk about with my clients a lot of times is I love creating those moments where a reader says, oh, I thought I was the only one, but you're not. And so vulnerability can be so powerful. But I think, as I said in my blog post, I think when vulnerability becomes an aesthetic, that's when you get a problem.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the sort of most common ways I see people doing this is what I call the writing equivalent of like the hashtag I woke up like this picture, And so somebody's like, oh, guys, I'm going to share something really vulnerable with you. It's hard for me to write. And then they say something really tiny like, I didn't empty my dishwasher last night. I feel really bad.
I know.
And so you're like, wow, if that's the worst thing that you do, then I am really messed up. So it makes it feel really bad,
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I think you just said something that that sort of I was taking notes. Let me look and see. Yeah. So how do you apply that vulnerability in I think you touch upon it a little bit, but I really want to dig in with you because copywriting is your thing.
Yeah.
So what are the few things that specifically when you define vulnerability in the copy and content context,
Yeah.
like what is the key of it? What is the gem of it? Like what is the thing that you would say, yes, you get it when you get vulnerability in your copy when that happens?
The way that you do that is by getting a very, very good understanding of who you're writing to, what they think about, and most importantly, why they think the way they think about it. That's what it all comes down to.
Yes.
Yeah. One thing I tell my clients a lot is if I don't know what you're thinking about at 4 a.m, then I'm not doing my job right. You have to think about what these people, what somebody wakes up worrying about. And I'm not talking about the surface level, like, oh, I'm worried that this is it. But like, when you wake up and you're like, gosh, what am I doing with my life? Like those level worries. Get that. They connect with them in that very deep way. And you can start to build that emotional connection and rapport with them.
Right. Absolutely. And would you also say that in a way that, when you do it, you also, because we're talking about copywriting in a business and marketing context. So I would say when you do that, you also want to make that connection and talk and show them your relevance to them in this particular context. Otherwise, it's kind of like, oh, you're digging the knife in, you're twisting it, but you're not letting people a way out of saying like, I have a solution for you, or this is how you can get started with resolving this problem or seeing a way out. Because I see a lot of that copywriting thing, right? You dig in, you twist the knife, and then they forget to talk about like, okay, so you twist the knife, and okay, now people are like, okay, now I'm all screwed up, and you don't give people an out. And I feel like that's kind of, that doesn't serve either party because the reader just feels like crap.
Yeah.
And you're not communicating your relevance to them. And I think this is often the part that was missing in some copy that I see is just because they were taught to twist the knife, they twist the knife and add salt, and then they forget to talk about, the next part of it.
Absolutely. I think there's a really fine line between demonstrating an understanding of their problem and just bullying them, and making them feel like crap because they haven't bought your thing yet.
Exactly. Like how do you walk that line?
Experimentally. You're going to fail with it sometimes. And also because, no copy is going to hit every person exactly the same way. So you have to try and think, how it's going to hit most people, that particular target audience that you're talking to.
Yeah.
It's really about empathy, I think. It's about thinking, it's about putting yourself in that person's shoes and saying, okay, I've got a really good understanding of what they're worried about. I've got a really good understanding of their problems. How am I going to be feeling if I've just read this copy? Yeah. And then you respond. Obviously, you should follow up with your solution. But I will say that I don't really believe in the whole, like, I call it the cruel to be kind version of copywriting. Where you really go in and you just really break somebody down so that they'll buy your thing. Because that's ultimately self-defeating, Yeah,
and I feel what really turns me off is if you don't whip out your credit card right now, you're a loser kind of copy. And I really feel like to every person I believe, I don't know, from me as someone selling programs and products, you want to just lay out the facts, lay out that, how they're feeling, you lay out the empathy, and also give them space to think for themselves. Because the last thing I want my people to do is sort of, of course, I'm not going to like bully them into buying anything, but also, use this scarcity thing or use any kind of like, you're missing out thing, like pulling out the FOMO trigger and get them to buy it without really having the space to consider, is it really right for where I am at this moment and for the way that I am marketing myself?
Yeah, definitely. I think that a lot of times the reason that people do it like that is because they're kind of taught these templates and these strategies, and they have some merit. I mean, it's better to work with something that is going to kind of work than to just go in blind, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But they try to use these algorithms and these buzzwords and whatever to sort of like hack the relationship with their reader. And
oh my god, tell me about hacking relationship, and what's what you feel, it's sort of like, what is your definition of it, and what's the problem with it? Because I mean, you can hack things, but I don't think relationship is one of those.
No, definitely not. So I think the first question was, what do I think hacking a relationship is? Yeah, I think that's when you'll sign up to these copywriting seminars, or people will send you email series of like, how to write the perfect blog post, use these 5 words, and make sure your email subject header is only 7 words long or less, and algorithms show that most people answer emails between 2 and 7 in the evening, and this and this and this, and all of that's really great information to know, and it's definitely stuff you should consider.
Mm-hmm.
But humans are humans, like, you're not writing to statistics. You can't form a relationship with a number. So you have to realize that there's actual people on the other end of that.
Oh my God, love it.
And people get that too. I mean, anybody is like this. We all hate getting those emails that are like, dear customer 527, we are so happy to welcome you to whatever. They're not, that that's a form letter.
Mm-hmm. Oh, totally. I mean, it's, I love what you just said. There's a human being at the other end. And I think that's what really tripped people up. I mean, a lot of people get sort of, they just freeze when they think about, oh my God, I have to write copy, I have to write sales page. Yeah. And I mean, especially for a lot of my clients, they are great when they connect with people one-on-one, when they talk to clients and all that good stuff. But when it comes to writing copy, they freeze. I'm like, oh my God, marketing, what am I going to do? And just remind yourself that, it is really, when it comes down to it, communication is human being with another human being.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And just remember that there's another human being at the other end reading your stuff. It's not you, right? It's almost like, because we got all those templates and checklists and trainings and best practice and stuff like that, it feels like we are going back to school and writing for a template.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, because we're so worried about, are we saying it right? Do we have all the persuasive elements? Are we, are we pulling all the triggers? We forget that the other end is a human being reading your stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Human being want connection. Yeah,
exactly. And I think the templates are very comforting, to some people, because it's scary to put yourself out there and to say, this is who I am, this is what I'm selling. Mm-hmm. I think it's good for you, and everybody sounds ridiculous when they're when you first say it out loud like that. So it's easy to want to go to a template.
Yeah.
But like you said, you're not selling to a market, you're not selling to statistics, you're not selling to an algorithm, you're selling to people.
Yeah, absolutely. And those templates, I say that all the time, but I'm going to get into my soapbox again for a minute, is they really is, there's a lot of fear that caused us to use those templates, right? The fear that, oh, we don't know enough, we're not good enough, I better find someone else's stuff to hide behind. And there's the fear of missing out. Am I missing this element or that element? Am I pulling all the strings? And I like to tell people, if you're pulling all the strings, but if you're pulling them a different direction, they cancel out each other.
Yeah, exactly.
And one more thing is the fear of being criticized. Like, if you feel like you are using a template and you have all the elements, you have the right format, at least it's like that kind of conformity thing.
Yeah, you feel like if I do it right, if I tick the boxes, then it has to work. Then
Or at least I don't look ridiculous. If it doesn't work, I don't look ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, okay. That element though, I think it's like Brene Brown says in her book, you know, if you're not in the arena getting your ass kicked, I don't want to hear from you. You have to stand out, and you know, you're gonna mess it up. It happens. Nobody hits 100 all the time. You know, your copy is just not going to appeal to some people, and that's just the way it's going to be. You know, you can use the best talent in the world, but you can't guarantee anything.
Right. So as an experienced copywriter, how do you deal with, you know, people not everybody liking your stuff? I mean, intellectually we know, right? But you know, emotionally it still sucks. So what do you do about that?
Wow. What do I do? I've gotten better about it. Let me say that. Because like you said, intellectually you're like, oh, well, of course no one's going to like all my stuff. But then when you get that person and they're just like, oh, I can't, you know, that doesn't resonate with me at all. Or, you know, I really disagree with what you wrote, something like that. It really does hit you, you know, and you're kind of like, okay. But the way that I deal with it is, first of all, just take a breath, you know, like take a breath and realize I'm feeling vulnerable about this, or you know, maybe this particular comment for whatever reason triggered something in me. Take a breath, step back, and just say, okay, this is what's going on. I understand what's going on. You can kind of get a little bit of distance from it, so you're not just in that emotional hole of, oh my God, nobody likes my stuff, you know. Another thing that I found really helpful is to have sort of a list. I call it like my emergency day list. So if for some reason something's really just snagged me, or I'm, you know, having a really emotional reaction to something, then I go back and I look at some things, you know, comments that people have made about my work before, where they said, oh, we really loved your work, or oh, this was great, or you got us perfectly. So you sort of try to balance it back out with other things, to realize that ultimately, you know, your work is right for the people it's right for. And if somebody's not resonating with it, then that's okay too.
Yeah. And I don't know about you or other people or the viewer, but for me, the words, it just have more sort of emotional connection with me than just, you know, jumping up on an audio or video and just start yakking. I guess it's just because, you know, you really, you can labor on it and you can chew on every single one to make it just right. So there's more emotional investment in it. Would you say that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, unless you are just like free writing something and throwing it up, which I wouldn't recommend. But yeah, there is, because you spend this time and, you know, you branch out, and it is like you're putting a little bit of yourself out there. You know, I think anytime you publish something, you're making yourself a little bit vulnerable. Unless you're just completely emotionally disconnected from it, in which case it's not going to be very good anyway.
Exactly. I love what you just talking about is putting your emotions in it. What are some, and you know, personally, I put a lot of emotion and a lot of me in my own writing, and I can almost tell, you know, how well it is received by how much I'm actually showing up in my writing. So what are some tips for people who sort of like, okay, I know I have to show up and be, you know, just my personality, be seen in my writing. But where do we start? Like how to really sort of start getting vulnerable, getting a vulnerable, sort of like the vulnerable muscle, so that we can actually show up in our writing without hiding behind, you know, jargons and buzzwords and templates and formula.
Right. I think the first thing to realize is that it's going to be uncomfortable. So if you're feeling uncomfortable, that doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It just means you're doing it. How do you get more comfortable with it? One thing that I do sometimes, if I'm having a hard time getting something out, if I find that I'm kind of blocking myself, is I write it almost as though I would a diary entry. I just pretend nobody's going to read it. And then you can get it out. Once you get past the first couple of paragraphs, then that also helps too. Those are usually awful no matter what you write. It's just going to be terrible. So you put them out and then, you know, delete them later.
It's almost like just type and get it over with.
Exactly. And it's so painful sometimes. You know, you're like, oh God, this is the worst thing I've ever written, you know. But then once you start doing that, then you can just delete it and you finally get to the good stuff once you relax a little bit.
Yeah. And then I think it's definitely a muscle that you train yourself, because when the words start flowing, you're like, okay, you know, I I am feeling it on the page versus you're just squeezing it out. You're not connected with it. And I think at a certain point, I mean, a lot of people, a lot of my community, they're very intuitive people. So I think, there's a gut feeling that, oh my God, I have to get it out there. And one of the things that I feel to be very helpful for people is to really find that message that you connect with, that you have conviction in, that you feel like you have to tell the world. Like whether anybody is reading or not, it doesn't matter. I have to put it on the page and put it out there and hit publish.
Yeah, exactly. That's the question I ask my clients a lot is, if you were going to die in the next 5 minutes and I was the only person that you could talk to before that, and you could tell me one sentence, what would you say? And that you can drill really down into the heart of what you believe that way.
That's a great question. And what I like to call that is an element of inevitability in there. Like it has to come out of you.
Yeah.
It just feels so strong that you just have to get it out there. But I think the key really is to find that message that you feel like the world has to know.
Yeah, exactly. I think you're really right about that. And I think it's sometimes when you get that uncomfortable feeling of being emotionally disconnected for something, it's because you're writing about something you don't really believe in.
Yeah, and I think that's really sad, because I think that makes many people sort of refrain from writing or blogging for their business, because they feel like, oh my God, this is business. I have to sound a certain way, look a certain way, and they are disconnected from the words, and the words are not connecting them with the business or the conviction and mission behind the business. So when you read those copy, you can feel the disconnect.
Yeah, exactly. And the readers really feel it too, because a lot of times when you are having copy like that, you end up writing in words that nobody actually uses in real life. Like I just had a client, and she had an opt-in that was for teachers who were feeling pressured by the new guidelines and stuff for having to meet the standardized testing. There were some changes in the UK. But anyway, she had written something like, sign up to get my free guide so you can more effectively manage increased scrutiny levels at the school day, something. And I'm like, yeah, but nobody sits around and you're like, talking to their friend over coffee and says, gosh, you know what I wish? I wish I had a free guide that would help me deal with increased scrutiny levels at the school day, Like,
I know. Yeah. And that's one thing that I ask my clients, like, what do they walk around thinking? Or if they see you on the stage after you talk, what are they going to come up and ask you, right? Yeah. Probably someone's not going to go around and say, oh my God, I wish I have more positivity in my life today.
Yeah, exactly.
It's more like, how do I deal with that jerk at work? I mean, ultimately it could be the same thing, but like, what are they saying, right? And I think this is the part that really, it's really about translating your conviction and your mission into words that relate. And I'm not just talk about, the good old copywriting thing, like, oh my God, you have to use the word that your ideal clients are using. Like, we all know that. Yeah. But on top of that is words that actually connect you with your business.
Yes, exactly.
Because if you are not showing up, if you are not convinced about what you are saying, then you cannot expect other people to buy into it if you don't buy what you're saying.
Yeah, and no buzzword or algorithm can get over that. It's a fatal disconnect.
No, plain English. That's why I like to say plain English.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So what I really like that is I think we get to one of the things that I want to circle back to in the beginning is when you say, when you just talk about yourself, when you just talk about your stuff, you would sound like a jerk in your writing.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key, is to find those words that really connect you, your business, and your audience.
Yeah, exactly. It's a bit like you need to first you need to find your voice, which I think that both ends of the spectrum, the whole like find your voice spectrum, are wrong. You actually need to find what I call your radio voice, which is the voice where you're a little bit more polished, like a little bit more, put together than you are when you talk normally. But once you find that, you also need to find your reader's language, and then you sort of merge those together, and that's how you get that connection, because you're truly connected, they're truly connected, and the words are connecting both of you.
I love that. I love that. And I think it's that connection is so important. I love that. Yeah. So any tips of finding, just like finding those two pieces and then marrying them together?
Let's see. There's so many things. I don't know where to choose. So, okay, for finding your voice, the first thing you need to know is that it's probably going to be a long and evolving process. There's never like an end all be all, like this is my voice and that's it. And that's, done with that. The more you write, the more you'll see themes and words and mistakes and stuff that you tend to make.
Yeah.
It's also important to really think about what you believe, like you said, getting a sense of why you're writing this at all, because that'll make a huge impact on how you write and how you come across.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you've sort of dived into that, you kind of do it in a mirror image for your readers, I think. You put yourself in their shoes and think, okay, I'm this person. This is what's going on in my life. This is how I feel about it. And this is why I feel that way. What do I need to hear? Like, what would I want to hear from somebody who is, for instance, going to be my copywriter or going to be my business coach or whatever?
Yeah, I like that. Is when you said, I think that's so important. It's like, what do they need to hear? Because I think, and there's another piece that I feel like a lot of people are missing is, what do they need to know in order to take the next step with you?
Yeah.
And that's often like the missing piece, right? You know what's going on in their head. Mm-hmm. You know what you have to offer, and you know you can solve their problem.
Yeah.
But the question is, there may be some misconception or missing information that is the missing piece to help them understand you can help them in an effective way that they haven't tried before.
Yeah. A lot of people miss that. And I think it's actually just because of like a human cognitive bias. There's a really great book called Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath. Called The Curse of Knowledge. So people have done studies, and in these studies, you had one person who was tapping out a song on a table, right? And so they would say, okay, Ling, I want you to tap out the Star Spangled Banner on your desk. Then there would be the other person in the study who is supposed to identify the song purely on the taps. The people who are doing the tapping think like, well, this is super obvious. How can you not get it? But the people who are listening to the tapping don't get it because they're not hearing it in their head. They don't know the song to begin with. So that's exactly what happens. It's the same thing. You're tapping and your readers are like, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's what, and I think that's really circles back to one thing that you said earlier. So important is empathy.
Yes.
It's empathy. It's really putting yourself in the shoes, and it's not just about doing research. It's not just about raw data. It is about, well, it's almost like it may not be rational, but what do they need to know? And I'm saying like need to know as in need to know emotionally.
Yeah. To
really be committed to buying your stuff or working with you. Because I think when you talk about effective copy, there are two components, right? The logical mind and the emotional side of it. And you really have to talk about both. And I think what we're sort of trying to tease out is sort of the emotional side of it.
Right.
What do they really need to know from that perspective? Because you can load them up with features and, and benefits that speak to the logical mind.
Yeah.
But something is just not clicking because they're screaming, but you're not hearing me.
Yeah, exactly. It won't mean a thing. One of my very favorite quotes is, nobody goes to bed at night and dreams about quality. Because, that's what people say, oh, I've got this, it's the high quality product, and they'll list out feature after feature after feature after feature, and it all makes perfect logical sense. But if you don't have the emotional component there, it's not gonna, you're not gonna connect. It's not gonna work.
I mean, unless you're selling soda, but I guess most people, most people on the line are not.
No,
So
it's a little different. So with soda, I mean, I look at the Coke commercials. It's a little bit like we're connected, we're cosmopolitan. They sell the idea of being cool. They don't sell the idea of having the most.
right. Salt,
Yeah.
salt and sugar. Let's go back to that. Yeah. I mean, like even soda, even dog food, like there's an identity associated with it.
Yes, identity is hugely important. It's so, so important because that's where the most basic primal part of our brain makes decisions, and it will convince the logical part of the brain will twist itself around to convince itself to agree with the emotional part. So if you put the emotional part on board, you're 99% there already.
Well, yes, absolutely. Even though you cannot, I mean, you can sort of negate the logical mind because unless both sides are convinced. So you still need to put those features in to say, okay, logical mind, go play with those while I decide over here. But yeah, I think that's so important to really understand about the identity piece. Like, how do you weave the identity piece into a piece of copy to make that work?
I think the first thing that I do is I always think about what identity means to us as humans. So from like a neuroscience psychology point of view, identity is hugely, hugely, hugely important. It's why we make a lot of decisions that we do. So there was a study by a professor at Stanford, Professor James Marsh, and he found out that there were basically two models that we use to make decisions. And the first one is the consequences model, which is if I do this and this result happens, is that what I want? And the second one is the identity model, which is, does the type of person that I am do that thing? And the second one is so much more powerful. I mean, they will actively act against their self-interest if it's the thing that the kind of person they are does. So you have to bear that in mind, just how powerful it is.
And how do you sort of inspire them to become that person in a piece of copy? I know, because my sort of sometimes what I do is that I really want to say not just like where they are at, but think about who do they inspire to be and speak to them from that place. Because if when they read your stuff and they feel like they are that person and assume that identity, they would do something that is in alignment with that identity.
Exactly.
Which is getting your help to get to that identity. So how do you inspire that identity or fold in that identity in a piece of copy? Because you're not just going to say you are ... right? That doesn't work.
You're fantastic. You'll buy my stuff. Yeah. No. What you have to do is you have to give them something that is aspirational but achievable. So let's say you were an interior designer blogger, right? If your audience is young 20-somethings and then every single apartment is a 3-bedroom apartment that's completely decked out, anthropology from floor to ceiling, and it's gorgeous and there's nothing wrong with it ever, like that's not going to be achievable for the majority of people in your target audience. So they're going to tune you out because, it makes them feel bad. So you need to give them something that is aspirational, like they're not there yet, but they can kind of see that they could get there. And the second part of that is you treat them like the person that's already there, or you go them the steps, like I know how to get you there, and here's what I can tell you to prove that.
Yeah, I think the balance is so important to sort of like say, hey, I understand where you are at, but also speak to them from that place that they aspire to be so that they can assume that identity.
Exactly. It's a bit like when, like if you're nervous about doing something and your best friend says, oh, you're going to be great, don't worry, no problem, that's not a problem for you. Then you can kind of step into that. You're like, okay, well, if they think I can do it, I probably can do it. And then you sort of step into that role.
And I think that's also and I think that's really important to really know where your ideal client is, because if you don't know where they are, you cannot create those steps for them.
Yes.
You go one step at a time to get to where you want them to be, aspired to be, in order to be, have that identity to work with you or buy your stuff.
Yeah.
But you need to know where they are at so that you can build those steps. Sometimes you need a few steps before they can make the connection and say, oh yeah, I get it.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you don't know where they are, then you could be telling them something they're just not going to get it at all. Even if you can see the connection, they're not going to be able to. So you really give them every step of the way.
Right. But if you if you put them too low down at the round, and every time you do something, you start from the beginning, you are going to lose some people as well, because they're like, nah, I know that already. Nah, I've been there already. Yeah. And I think that is one of the things that I see some of the one size fits all copywriting strategy is sometimes missing, is they just say, oh, you have to talk about the lowest denominator kind of way of approaching things. And I feel like, if I am already let's say beginner, intermediate, and advanced, right? If you're always talking from the beginner's perspective, you are going to lose the intermediate and the advanced, even if you're offering something for those people. Because if I were intermediate and I look at them like, nah, I know that already.
Yeah, exactly.
And on the other hand, if you speak using the intermediate language way, I would say, yeah, this person gets me. He or she knows exactly where I am at. And yeah, sure, you're going to lose the beginner people, but that's a choice that we need to make. And a lot of times we're not making that choice and always go back to the lowest denominator. And we're actually missing out on the ideal client, right? We're talking about ideal client. Not everybody wants to work with beginner.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, your copy needs to be intentional every time. It shouldn't be just, I'm throwing something up here because that's what whatever copywriting person I like says I should do. You need to think about who it's going to, why it's going to them, and why they should care at all.
Exactly. And that also goes back to, using jargons and stuff, right? Yeah, usually jargons are bad, but if you throw in just, I feel like there's just like really nice little accents to say, yeah, I know where you're at. Like those little, maybe it's not jargon, but like words that only people with a certain understanding would use that create bond, that create that insider type of connection.
Yeah. And that makes them feel good too, because then they're like, oh, I'm kind of an expert on this. I know all about that. So it gives them a little boost of, good feeling, like this person gets me and I like how I feel when I'm around this person, which makes them likely to stick around.
Yeah. So it's kind of like acknowledging their knowledge, acknowledging that they already know something about the subject. And you know that they know. And that means that you're not going to waste your time taking them through all the basic stuff that's going to essentially waste their time and money.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you are doing that and intermediate people aren't buying, like that's exactly why. Nobody wants to sign up for something that might be helpful. They want to sign up for something that will definitely be helpful for exactly where they're at now.
Yeah. This is awesome. So I want to circle back to it. I know we can talk copy all day long, but I want to, there's like so many things to talk about, and it's such a vast subject. But I want to go back to the promise of the title of the blab, and just want to see if you have anything to add about, vulnerability in writing, or, being a jerk in your copy.
Well, I think the main things that I was thinking about when I wrote that blog post were, so you see people and they write these vulnerable blog posts, and their so-called vulnerable blog posts either tend to be not vulnerable at all, or they're like really uncomfortably, like should be in therapy, not a blog post vulnerable. It's finding the middle ground between that, because you can absolutely be vulnerable in a blog post and it can be so powerful. But you don't want to stand up and be this sort of attention-seeking jerk who's like, okay, everybody, listen to my problems. Because that's not fair on anybody, Like, it doesn't help you, because it's just sort of the equivalent of getting, like, messy drunk and crying about it, And it doesn't help them, because that's not what they're there for. So sort of my top tips for that are, your vulnerable post actually has to be vulnerable. Like, if you're going to expect me to undertake this emotional connection with you, it needs to be worth my while. I don't want to hear about how you forgot to walk your dog one night, because it happens. That's not vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
My second thing is, if you still get a really big emotional charge off of something, if something has happened to you and you're very upset about it, then you don't need to be blogging about it, or you don't need it in your copy, at least not yet. If it's something that you processed and you can make it very clear to other people that you are okay with it, then it can be a very powerful learning tool, and it can be really, very special for your readers. And then finally, I think it's really important to remember that whatever you write, it doesn't have to be comfortable. Like, sometimes it's very uncomfortable to read things that people write when they're vulnerable, but it's still very powerful, and it's beneficial to the reader to read it.
Mm-hmm.
So, you don't have to keep it sunshine and rainbows all the time, but you do have to make sure that whatever you're sharing, it's with the reader's best interest in mind all the time.
Yeah, totally. And I like to I really like to make the connection by sharing something personal and vulnerable at times. But always the question that I like to ask is, so what are my readers going to get out of it? Why is that relevant to them based on what I'm here to help them with?
Exactly. It's about the context, being in the context, your work context with them.
Mm-hmm.
You have to think about what's appropriate to share. And by appropriate, I don't mean like it has to be nice and, for polite society and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But what is appropriate to the relationship that you have with them?
Yeah. And I feel like just even if you don't, really say a big section that says, what you can get out of this experience. But I think in your own head, you should always answer the question, reader, here's what you get out of me telling you about this personal experience.
Absolutely. And if you can't come up with a very good answer, you shouldn't share it, at least not yet.
And I think there's always, I think that's a balance too. It's like I have written from a raw place where it's still evolving. And I think it's really about where your head is at when you write that. If you're just like one big mess without distance, without knowing why people need to read this, then back off.
Yeah.
But it can be very powerful if you're still evolving in the middle of it, and take people through the journey with you while you can offer a perspective. I mean, I think that can be very powerful if you can do it right, but it does require a lot of, discipline to really take yourself out and say, okay, just just kind of like, your, what do you say, like the out of body experience, right? Just look down from above and say, what can my readers get out of it?
Yeah, exactly. And that's hard to do if you're hurting or, if you're very angry about something.
Mm-hmm.
Not possible. It is hard.
Yeah, it is really challenging, but it can also be very rewarding, and it can really connect you, because that way, what I did at that particular sort of phase in my life is that it's also about me evolving my business. So it was relevant. Yeah. I have a lot of people going through that as well. So they feel like I'm taking them on a journey and evolving with them. And I think that was a powerful experience for both myself and a lot of people who follow my post. And that, and that really create a, it's like kind of like a 3-month experience for everybody. So in a way that was very powerful. And yeah, sure. I'm sure that that was a very fine line. I'm sure I fall to the wrong side once in a while, but yeah, but it was, it can be very powerful.
Oh, definitely. Absolutely. Yeah. I think you're really right. And I think it's what you said, the way you said it was perfect. You can share something that's very raw and, something that's very vulnerable, as long as you can at least have one reason, that this is going to be good for your readers, as long as it's not just all about you and you venting or, you processing something in their face, then it can be so powerful.
Yeah. And I mean, story, like everybody likes a story. Everybody learns from story. So if you're willing to share your story and then say, hey, this is why it's relevant for you, the message really sinks in.
It does. It makes it, just from a technical standpoint, it makes it much more memorable. But from an emotional standpoint, we love stories. You know, humans latch onto them, and it's a great way to learn. It's a great way to get a message across without just saying, "Okay, here's my message. That was my message. I'm done." You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
Wow, this is awesome. A lot of gems that you just shared with us. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much. I love talking about it.
Yeah, we can keep talking about it, but I think people will just kind of shut down if they see the video to be like 3 hours long. So let's try to be considerate. So Rachel, thank you so much. Is there I would love for people to be able to find you. So where can they find you, and what what can they expect from you?
Oh, exciting. Okay, so people can find me at boltfromthebluecopywriting.com. Or I hang out on Twitter a lot, and my handle is at RCAllenWriter. That's RCALLEN writer. So I'm always up for that. As for what people can expect, lots of blog posts. Recently on vulnerability as part of Makeness Media's really awesome Brave blogging project. And I'm also working on developing some workshopping days and courses. So that's very exciting.
That's awesome. And you're in London, yeah?
Yes, I'm based in London.
Cool. Awesome. So thank you so much for being here. And in case you come in from Rachel's end, I'm going to tell you who I am. I am Ling Wong, and you can find me at business-soulwork.com. And what I do mostly with people is I help them I work a lot with multi-talented and multi-passionate folks. So I help them distill all the big idea into one cohesive message and find the words that sell, that connect with people. So there's a little bit overlap with Rachel, but I'm not like, let's roll up our sleeve and write that page type. I'm more sort of in the high level of, okay, what really connects, what's really true to your soul, and how you express that out into the world. And on top of that, I help people find a plan to work it, to cut the busy work and do what matters. Because you can write sales page till you turn blue. But if it's not what is really tapping into your strength and the things that you're doing, it's not really what matters to your vision. It doesn't matter. We can do a lot of busy work. And it doesn't matter if it's not taking you where you want to be. So that's what I do.
Well, that sounds fantastic. Thank you so much for having me, Ling.
Thank you, Rachel. Great to have you here. And we can jam some other day.
Yeah, sounds great.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.